Hey, what's up guys? My name's Thomas. I'm the author of the project file. And first off, I want to say thank you very much for purchasing Neon Sign Kit. In these series of videos, we're going to go over exactly how to edit the project. Everything from installing the fonts at the very beginning and opening up the project file, all the way through the steps that I have set up for you, and then some tips and tricks for animating and getting the best results possible with this kit. So let's dig right into this. And the first thing I want to go over with you is the download that I have. You want to download from VideoHive the project file, and then I'll close out of this. And so it's like a fresh version. We'll not save that. Now I want you to go, I have it on my desktop right now, so we'll double click onto there. And then we can see within our download that we have an assets folder, we have instructions, and we have two After Effects project files. Within the assets folder, we have this camera examples, and these are, when we get to step 5, choosing your camera, these are a quick way to select which one you like and which one you think will work for your neon sign. The next folder we have is the images folder, and these have everything from placeholder images to textures to actually the sports logo, which I created just for this video because in version 1 of the project I had a sports logo. And some people were mad because I didn't include it in the project file, but I couldn't because I didn't create it myself. And this one I did create myself. And I ask that you can use it for playing around with, but please don't use it for anything real. It's not for commercial use. And then we have our instructions file. Now, if we go to our instructions file and double click into there, you can see that we have on the top, thank you for purchasing Neon Sign Kit. So again, thank you. And then we have, please watch this video below, which you are doing right now. So congratulations. The next we have fonts, and we have two sections. We have free fonts and recommended paid fonts. Let's go over the free ones first. These two I would definitely recommend downloading. This one, especially Nicanely, is the main font for the different modules that you'll be working with. And the same with this Big John Slim Joe. It's actually the Slim Joe one that we're going to be working with. And then I would recommend downloading all these other ones as well. And how you're going to do that is just take your mouse and drag over the URL, copy it, go to your browser, and then paste that in the window. And then once you get to that, you can just go into the different spots and download away. I'm going to say up front that thin fonts work much better with this project than other ones. And that kind of makes sense when you think about it because neons are thin by nature. You don't see really thick neons. So any font that you want to use, I would recommend looking for thinner fonts. But I'm going to show you some tricks in the next video for how to thin out a thicker font. Moving on, we have these recommended paid fonts, and there are two of them that I recommended. The first one is one that I actually used in version 1 that a lot of people asked me about, and so I included that, and it's only like $6 or $7. It kind of varies, I think, based on the sales that they have going on. And then the second font that I have available is this Savine ST one, and I love this one. I've used it for a bunch of freelance projects, and it's very similar to one that I used in the version 1 project that was removed. Now, I just want to mention with this that these two paid ones are affiliate links, and that means that I get a very small % of the sale from them, but that's not why I'm recommending them. I'm recommending them because they're really awesome fonts to use with this product. But if you don't want to buy them, that's completely fine. There are plenty of free fonts you can use. And then below that, we just have instructions that we're going to be going over through the rest of this video. But the important thing is the fonts. Alright, so now it's time to dig into the After Effects project file. So I'll double click back into the download from VideoHive, and you can see that we have these two AEP files, After Effects project files. And the first one is the demo file. And that is the exact sequence if you want to check out anything I did for the demo. And some of the modules that were in the demo I have set up for you in the main project file, so you might not even have to open up the demo. Probably just if you wanted to see how I did something. So feel free to check that out. But what you're going to want to do is double click onto this AEP file, and it's going to have this prompt saying that this has to be converted. And so we just want to say okay and let it do its thing. And you shouldn't be missing any assets, but if you are, it's most likely because the download became corrupt from VideoHive. So I'd recommend in that instance to just re-download the project file by logging into VideoHive. On the top right, select your username, and from the drop down, select Downloads, and there you can re-download the project file. And then the last thing before we dig in, I want to make sure that all of our windows look the exact same. So I want you to go on the top right to Standard, and then click Reset to Saved Layout. And that is going to make that effects panel that I just had up disappear. Now, I think for tutorial purposes, and actually just in general, I usually have the effects panel docked right here. So how we're going to do that is we're going to go to Window and then Effect Controls. And by default, that docks it with the project panel, and we don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the effects panel, click, drag, and drop so that this purple comes up right beside there. and then we have it docked right beside, so your screen looks exactly like mine. So now that we have our windows looking the same, let's go over the different steps. We have 5 steps for this project to get your neons looking how you want them, and we're going to go through them in detail individually, but let me just go over them really quickly now. We have step 1, insert your text or logo, and then step 2, we have our details. So we're going to be adding all the different caps if you want, the ties that are on the neon. Those are 2 new features, by the way, of version 2. And then our regular little detail behind the neons. And then we have our wires that we're going to be adding in, and our module construct. So we're going to take all the different elements and construct them together, select our background, and finally we're going to take our camera, select the camera, and bring that into the module. Now I know this sounds like a lot, but we're going to break it down, and it's a really simple step-by-step process to get really awesome results. Now, in addition to the steps 1 through 5, we have this bottom folder, templates. And if we twirl that down, you can see that we again have steps 1 through 4. So the way I have this project set up is I have 10 unique instances within these main ones of the project. So let's say, for example, you have to make 10 unique scenes with neon signs in them. Well, then you would use the regular step 1 through 4 workflow that you find in the main project panel. But let's say that you just want to make one quick neon and you really liked the brick scene within the demo. So what you would do in that instance is you would go to the templates, twirl that down, and then twirl down step 1, text or logo, and then go to brick text. And if we twirl that down, you can see that it will double click into there, that's the exact brick text that you saw in the demo. And I'll twirl that up, and then we'd go to the details in the next step, and then we would go to the brick details, and there we would customize the details from in there, and then we'd go to the wires and customize those, and then we go to the construct, go to brick, and there you can see that that's the exact scene, including the camera move in the background that I used in the demo. Now I know from a lot of customer support that people are kind of split down the middle, where half the people like this completely customizable modules from scratch, that they're all the exact same thing, and half the people didn't really care about that. They just really liked one particular module within the demo and they wanted to use that. So for those people, you would use the template route. And then just to be crystal clear on this, how you would use it then is, let's say that you're on your 5th scene, and what you'd do is you'd go to module 5, then text, and you'd use all the module 5s from there on. So step 2, details, you would use all the module 5 details. And then wires, same thing, you go to module 5 wires, and then you would go into step 4 module construct and go into module 5, and there all of your different text, details, wires would be set up for you within there. Now, before we're moving on to step 1, text or logo, I just want to go over some workflow enhancements for you that might help you work faster. So the first thing I want you to do is change your resolution. Instead of full, set that to half. And you can leave it on full. I actually did for almost all of the creation of this project, leave it on full. But if you're wanting to work faster, definitely adjust the resolution playback from full to half. The other thing that I have set up for you is if you go into with any of the modules, when we are animating them, I have ways that you can disable features. Now, if we go to the scene controller for a second, you can see that all these options come up, and we have this enable quick edit mode. And so that's one thing that you can do to make this run a lot faster, is you can enable this quick edit mode. And that's great for editing the camera or just seeing composition wise how things look and line up together. And then finally, in the neon controller, if we scroll down to the bottom, you can see that right here we have disable options. Disable the details, disable the wires, disable caps, ties, or the vignette. And just know too that you don't have to have all the different options enabled all the time. And a lot of the ones in the demo, I didn't even have like the caps on or the wires. So I think that is everything for the overview. It's time to start actually digging in and editing the steps 1 through 5. So in the next video, we're gonna go over adding your text. All right, guys, we are on tutorial number 2, adding your text. So what I want you to do is go to step 1, text or logo, and twirl that down, and then go to module 1 text. And we're going to be working with module 1 for the remainder of the tutorial series. And then within that folder, we have a folder, Module 1 Logo Creator. We're going to worry about that in the next tutorial, but for right now, we're going to go into this Module 1 text composition. So we'll double click into there. And now if your screen looks a little bit different than mine, you may have toggled transparency enabled, this button right here. So you want to make sure that that is selected so that you don't see the grid. The first thing you're going to notice within the timeline panel is that we have these 2 text layers. And this bottom text layer has a Luma mat on it for the top text layer. And if you're not seeing the track mat options on the very bottom left, it's this button right here in the middle, expand or collapse the transfer controls pane. So we'll make sure that that's selected. And then we'll change the neon from Luma to no track matte. And then we'll delete this top layer. So now we're kind of at from scratch. So there's a couple things I want to go over with you before we actually change the text. And these are very crucial factors for getting great results using the kit. So the first factor is you want to make sure that the font that you're using is relatively thin. You don't want to be using a bold or a headline font that has really thick areas in it. You want to make sure that you're using thin, if possible, weights of fonts. The next thing is you want to make sure that the font has uniform lines throughout it. So you don't want something that has like really thin stems and thick areas. You want to make sure that it's all uniformly the same, like this font is, and all the fonts in the instructions for that matter. And one last thing I want to mention relating to the thickness of the fonts is you want to make sure in your scene that all of the elements within your neons are the same thickness. So for example, if we have a second text element, like maybe up here, for example, let's name it text. Now what you'd want to do with this is you want to make sure that the thickness of all the elements are the same. And you can see that because this text is scaled down compared to the neon text, that this neon is going to be quite a bit brighter than this one. So what we'd want to do in this instance is we want to thicken up the text just a little bit so that these two are the same thickness, and that'll create the best results. Because if you have multiple elements that are multiple sizes and thickness, it doesn't quite look as realistic as having all the neon elements the same thickness. And the glows actually end up looking way nicer when everything's consistent. And then the last factor is you want to make sure that the color value that you're using is relatively light. Okay, so I just want to demonstrate quick why using a thinner font is so important. And you don't have to follow along with these steps, just kind of pay attention and watch. I'm going to select the layer, I'm going to go to the character panel, and to open the character panel, just go to Window, Character, and I'm going to turn full bold on. And you can see if I undo redo that added quite a bit of boldness to the font. So go back to the module 1 layer where it all constructs together, and we'll let it render for just a second. And you can see that this completely blew out the neon, and that is not what we want. So the first thing you can do to turn the brightness down is you can go to the neon controller, and you can go to the simple neon animator, and you could turn this down. And we're going to go over this and a bunch of other stuff later, but just know for right now, this is one way you can turn the brightness down really quickly. Definitely say this is not the best way to do it. So I'll undo that, so it's back to 75, and we'll go back to module 1 text. And the best way I would say to do it is to thin out the font. So let's delete this layer, and you can follow along now if you'd like. And then we're going to hit Command T. Okay, so I'm going to select the area that I want text on, and I'm going to change this to example. And I still have full bold on, so I'm going to turn that off. And we'll kind of center up our text a little bit, something like that. Now, I think that this font is even a little bit thick the way it is, and I don't have any options to thin it out. That would be my first choice. If you can, if possible, change the weight of the font using the character panel to a lighter weight. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the example layer and hit Command D, and we're going to duplicate our text layer. And then we're going to go back to the character panel and change the color of the text to white. And then we're going to right-click that layer again and go to Stroke. And that added a red stroke around our text. So we want to go to the layer, to the stroke we added, and twirl down the stroke options, and then change the color from red to black. Hit OK. And then on the position, change that from outside to center. And now it kind of looks like we thinned out the font, but if I turn the toggle transparency off and on, you can see that all we really did was created a white text layer with a black stroke on it. So the last step we have to do is to go to our original layer and then go to the track matte and then Luma matte. And now if we toggle transparency, we can see that's exactly what we wanted. It did in fact thin out the font. And the cool thing about this trick, if you hit UU on the layer that's being matted and we twirl down stroke, you can adjust the size of the stroke to thin it out even more. So if I undo and redo that, now if we go back into module 1, you can see that we're getting the exact results that we want. We've changed the font, and I think it's looking really nice. So then we'll go back to module 1 text, and the last thing we would have to edit within this is the color. So I'm going to go back to the original text layer, and then I'm going to go to the character panel and change the color of this layer. Maybe we want something like blue. So what I want to make sure that you do is to try and have the color somewhere within this value. You don't want it to be too dark or too light. Just somewhere right around here is perfect. So what I would recommend doing is, let's say you wanted it blue, to not touch this area. Instead, just drag this hue up to something like right there, hit OK. And now if we go back to module 1, we can see that it's going to completely transform the scene. All right, and I think it's looking really nice. Those are my two favorites. I love the blue and I love the red orange color with the neon sign kit. Okay, so the last thing that I want to go over with you then, let's say we have a font that we want to thicken out a little bit. Maybe it's a little bit too thin because there are some ultra thin fonts out there. So the first method you could do is I'll turn this track matte off. So we're starting from scratch. So let's pretend that this font is too thin. So the first thing you'd want to check is just to double check that there isn't a weight that's thicker that you can use. And if there isn't, you can always use this faux bold setting. It's not perfect, but it does a good job. The other method that you can do though is you can just add a stroke to it that's the same color as your text. So for example, we'll right click, layer styles, stroke, and then we'll twirl down the stroke options, and then we'll take the color picker and we'll select our color either here or in the character panel if it's the same color as what we had for the text. And then now we can see that that looks like we've thickened it out, and we can adjust the size to something thicker and add weight to our font that way. All right, that is everything for adding your text. In the next video, we're gonna go over adding a logo. All right, guys, we are on tutorial number 3, adding a logo. And I'm really excited about this step because a lot of these are brand new features in version 2 to make converting your logo into a neon much simpler than it was in version 1. So what we're gonna do is go back to step 1, text your logo, and go back to module 1 text. And now we're gonna go into this folder. And you can see that I have 5 steps set up. And if you can't tell, I'm a fan of steps, especially when it comes to project files. What we're gonna do is we're gonna insert our logo. We're gonna isolate the primary, secondary, and tertiary colors if there is a tertiary color. And then we're going to construct them all together at the end. So let's go into insert logo. And we're gonna find our logo. So I'm gonna use the sports logo within the project. So I'll just hit Command I, and we'll go to the sports logo. That's within your download as well. Let's go to my desktop, and then within Assets, Images, Sports Logo, hit Open. And it's gonna ask if I want it as a composition or footage. I prefer compositions because then it has individual layers. And we're gonna drag that composition that just was created in. This is probably a PNG or a JPEG, or depending on your logo. But what we're gonna do now is, since we're using an Illustrator file, that means it's a vector file. So if you're using like a .ai or .eps file, that means it's a vector, and we wanna make sure that the continuously rasterize button is enabled. So I'm gonna click that right here, and then I'm gonna scale it up. And you want it something relatively large. Because we're going to scale it down later, but the following steps will be easier if we're using a larger logo in this area. Now, I can tell that the continuously rasterize has not taken a hold, and that's because we have to go within this composition and enable continuously rasterize on these layers as well. So now I'm going to go back into here. Now everything's crisp. So now we are ready to go into step 2, primary color. So I'll double click into there, and you can see right away that we have these crosshairs and our logo has strokes around it. And what I'm doing in these is I have this circle, and this circle is collecting the data, the color values underneath it. And it's creating a stroke on the color values that are underneath there. So it's really convenient. You can just take your mouse and click and drag and bring this around, and it will create strokes based on the color value that's underneath it. So what I want you to do first then is select your primary color. So in this case, it's blue. And then go to the controller layer, and we have some options within the effect controls panel. This first one, extract color range. What this is asking is, do you want me to create a stroke around all of the different areas of your logo that are this color? Or do you want it to just be around the areas that are connected to the color that's within the crosshairs? So if I disable this, you can see that these values like around the eye and the cheek, those all lose their stroke. So that's really convenient if you have a logo that has a bunch of different areas with colors. And we'll turn that back on. And the threshold and pre-blur, I think these are good at 20 and 1, but if you want to play around with them to kind of adjust the balance of what is selected and what isn't with the pixels. And then the line hardness, you might not want to touch this, but if you want to play around with it, go ahead. And then the line thickness, if you recall from the last tutorial, the thickness of the strokes makes a very big difference in the final result of the neon. So you can go in and adjust the thickness right here. So let's do something like 6, and we made it quite a bit thicker now. Okay, so we're going to do the exact same thing in the next step in 3 secondary color. So we'll double click into there. And now I would say our secondary color is gold. So we're going to click this circle and drag it over to the hair that's gold. And then the tertiary color, I would consider in this example white. So you can just kind of click, drag around. Maybe something like here is good. Okay, so we have all the values in all the different areas. Now we're going to go to 5, construct, and I'll double click into there. Okay, now if I zoom back, you can see that right away, this does not look great. This isn't exactly what we want, but now it's basically created 3 different layers for you to select and isolate more easily. So let's start out by going to the secondary and tertiary and disabling the visibility of those two. So we can say with the primary that this is what we want, but there's one area that we don't want because we selected it in the secondary, and that's the gold hair. So what we're going to do is we're going to mask that out. So I'm going to select the primary, I'm going to hit G, which brings up the pen tool, and I'm going to select around the hair. And I know this can be a little bit tedious, but I think it's better than the alternative, which is to use Vegas on the entire logo. And I'm going to go over that in just a minute because I still have that option. That was the method that I used in version 1, but I still think that this method is far superior because it's faster and it's more easy to control the width and the selection of the individual colors. Now, by default, when you create a mask around something, it selects it, and we want it to deselect or delete that area. So I'm going to go back to the primary layer and hit MM, and then I'm going to go to the mask and go to subtract. There. And now that's kind of taken out that hair area. So now when we go to secondary color and we enable that, now they're completely separated out. So that's looking really nice. And then finally, we can go to the tertiary, and now we can see that there's a lot of overlap that's happening here again. So I'm going to just select the tertiary and disable the top 2. Now I would say that for this example, and actually in the demo, I'm pretty sure that I only had white on the outside lines. So let's do that right now. I'm just going to go in and I'm going to select just the outside lines or isolate. So I'm going to be deleting everything that's within here. And then it selected them, so we want to hit MM, and instead of add, subtract, there. So now we have our logo all ready to go. Now I can tell right away that from these different color values that we've selected that we're going to get a really bright outside because white is going to be brighter than this darker blue color. So then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to add fills onto these to make sure that the values are what we actually want. And you could add a curves to them or a brightness, whatever you want to do and you're comfortable with in After Effects. But I think adding a fill kind of makes the most sense for me. I think that the values of the yellow are fine, but the blue is too dark. So let's bring up our effects panel. We're going to go to Window, Effect and Presets. And then I'm going to type in, well, you could either use a brightness and contrast, but I think a lot of people are more comfortable with using. So brightness and contrast, and we'll add that to the primary. And then we'll bump the brightness up there. So something like that. Finally, we're going to go into our module 1 text layer that we've created. And our text is still in there from before. I didn't delete it. So I'm going to delete that right now. And you might be wondering, I'm not seeing anything else in here. And I don't want to confuse you, but I have shy layers enabled on this. So this does have the logo within there. If you double click onto there, that's the construct layer. So we'll go into there. And now if we go back to our module 1, we have our awesome new logo that we've created. So based on these settings, I would probably go in and I would adjust right now the neon controller. I think it needs a little bit more glow. So I'm going to change that from 75 to 85. There, I think that looks a lot closer. I think that the yellow is a little bit too bright compared to the overall scene though. So I'm going to go back to the module construct. What I would do in this instance is you could either add a brightness to that, or I just add a fill. I think you have a little bit more control adding a fill to the layer. So I'll select secondary and type in fill and drag that over, and then change this to something within that kind of sweet spot of the neon, something right around here. And now if we go back to module 1 and we let it render for just a second, there, I think it looks really nice. That's what we're going for. Okay, so that's how you do it. And the last thing I want to go over with you is, let's say you don't want to go through all those different steps. You want to just do the version one way using Vegas. So what you're going to want to do in that instance is go back to Module 1 Logo Construct. And I also have Shy Layers enabled in this composition. So we're going to disable Shy Layers. And then I'm going to turn these top 3 layers off. And I'm going to enable these bottom 2 layers. And now you can see that this is the exact setup that I have for version 1. So what you'd want to do in this setting is either change this from transparent to stencil. And that kind of does a decent job of selecting the color values. And then you can isolate that if you'd like. And some settings that I'd maybe recommend adjusting on here would be the threshold and the pre-blur. We'll twirl that back up. And that's the quick way of doing it. The results aren't quite as nice, but it is a fast way. And in some instances, it might work just as well, depending on if your logo has a lot of gradients in different areas. So give both of those a try, but definitely try out the new method of selecting the primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. We are now ready to start adding our details. And how we're going to do that is we're going to begin in Module 1 Text. I'm going to twirl up these compositions, and we're in this composition right here, Module 1 Text, and this is just the base of what you get when you buy the template. And we're going to change this text to something like example. And I'm going to change both of them, the matte layer and the bottom layer, so then they are the same text. And I'm going to change the color to something, I don't know, I like blue, so let's do that. Something right around there. Okay, now we'll go back into Module 1. So what I'm going to do, now that we have our text in, is I'm going to go to Step 2, Details. Now, when we twirl this down, you're going to see that we actually have, in fact, 3 detail compositions. In version 1, I only had 1. Begin by going into the details, and I'll double click into here, and you can see that we have these details in here by default. Now, what I recommend doing is to go in and delete all but one of the details. Okay, we just have one left. Now, when you click on this layer, I want you to be able to see a box around the details. And if you're not seeing a box when you select it, I want you to hit Command-Shift-H, and that will allow you to have this box that makes selecting the details easy. So now all we're really going to be doing is just taking and dragging and setting these details where we want. But in order to create a new one, we're going to hit Command-D, and that will duplicate the layer. And now just place these wherever you think looks nice. And let's say for this one, we want to rotate it. So what we're going to do is hit W, or I remember it as rotate it around, and duplicate, Command-D, bring this one over. It's really just a matter of playing around with where you want these. I can hit W, and in the middle, if you just drag around, you can get that set up how you want. And in version 1, I had these set up as 3D layers, but now they're 2D, so they actually, they're much faster and easier to work with. And then the last thing I want to note within this details layer is this controller panel. And you can see with this controller layer that we have these effects that you can go in and you can modify all these at one time. And it makes it really fast. So you can adjust the width and the height. You can additionally go to all the layers and hit S and scale them all down at one time too. That's a really nice, fast way to do it. And then you can go in and change the color. So let's say you wanted it, I don't know, whatever color you want, you can change it to. You can adjust the screw color. It's those little details that make all the difference of the final result. You can change the screw size even. I don't know if you really want to do that, but you can. Okay, so we have our details in. Now let's go to the new version 2 options. Let's go to the caps. So we'll double click into there. And again, I'd recommend deleting all but one of them. Grabbing the first one, and what we're going to do with the caps is we're going to select areas that the text or logo ends on, where it makes sense that that is where a wire would come out from. And you don't have to put it there. I just think it kind of makes sense to think of it that way. So we're going to put it maybe like right here, and we're going to rotate it so that it looks like it's coming off of the end there. It doesn't have to be perfect. And maybe another spot we would do would be like over here on this X. We'll rotate it. I don't know, I'm just kind of winging it right now. Maybe on the bottom of this P, rotate it around. I'm hitting W and then rotating it. You could additionally go to the layer and hit R and then rotate it right there. That's a different way of doing it, if you're more comfortable with it that way. And we'll put 2 more. We'll put 1 here, and we'll put 1 here. Now, as you can see, these are not perfectly aligned. But one more option, again, on the controller layer, is you can adjust the cap width and the cap height really quickly, and the roundness. So if you want it more squared up or round, a good rule of thumb I think would probably be to have the caps just slightly larger or the same size as the neon if it's capping around. But it depends. If you're using the bulb feature, then you might want it smaller. Just whatever you think looks nice, and you can quickly go in and edit it. And then finally the ties. And this is getting really detailed. And of all the stuff in all of this project, this is the one that if you don't feel like messing with it, I would understand. But I think all these features added together creates a really nice result. So we're gonna go over, and you can probably barely even see this, but there's a little tiny crosshatch that's happening right there. And it makes it look like this tie is on here. And I did a freelance project for League of Legends where I made some neons for them. And they wanted this feature on there. And I'm like, that's a good idea. I will add that when I update the kit. So now you can add ties into it. So I'm just going to go in really quick. I'm actually probably going to fast forward this so you don't have to keep listening to me babble. There. Okay, all the ties are on. Now, again, the unique features you can do with it, you can adjust the tie width or the actual stroke of the tie. You can adjust how tall and how wide they spread out. All right, so I think that looks really good right now. Let's go back to our module 1 and let's look at our results. There, I think it looks awesome. Looks very realistic. These ties, I just love the ties. Like, I know they're kind of tedious, but they add so much to the final result. All right, you guys, we are now ready to start adding our wires. All right, you guys, we are on tutorial number 5, creating the wires. So let's dig in by twirling down step 3 wires and then twirling down module 1 wires and double clicking within there. You can work off of this wires layer that I have set up for you, but I'm just going to start from scratch. I find it easier. And if you're familiar with Photoshop and Illustrator and working with the pen tool, then this will be a breeze. But if you're not, that's okay. So what you're going to want to do is hit G, and that will bring up the pen tool. Now, hitting G actually cycles through a bunch of different tools. So we want to make sure we're on the pen tool. So we want to make sure that there's no plus or minus, like you don't want that or that or that or that. You want this, the pen tool. Now, before you actually make a point though, I want you to go to the fill, not to the color, but where it says the words fill. And then I want you to go to this none option and hit OK. And then the stroke, I want you, if it's not enabled, to enable it by clicking this solid color right there, and then select the color and select a value right around here. You don't want it all the way dark, but you don't want it very light at all. Like something like right there will be fine, 161616. And then the width, it's kind of arbitrary, but I'd say maybe start with like 5 or 6. Okay, so we're ready to start making our wires. So we're gonna make our first point by clicking where we want our first wire to be at. Next, we're gonna click, drag, hold, and we'll have a wire coming out from over there. And then we're going to say, I want the wire to end here. So we'll click, drag these handles, something like that. If you want to make a new wire, you're gonna deselect. So select anywhere down here. And now let's begin by making a wire. Let's just pretend that we want one from here to down here. We didn't add a cap here, but that's okay. So make a point here. Maybe I'll make a point down here, click and drag over, another point here. They don't have to be perfect. And I feel like the more perfect you try to make them, the more fake it actually ends up looking. So you want it to be kind of organic, like maybe something like that. I don't know, maybe adding something from here over to here. Again, I'm just kind of winging it. But you can see, like, if you squint your eye now, or you look at it this way, that these kind of look more realistic than these when I was trying to make this look kind of realistic when having it coming out of the cap. But I'm not going to mess with it too much because I think you get the idea. But the cool thing is, if we go over here to our shape layers that we've created and we hold shift and we select all of them, you can adjust the thickness by just adjusting the stroke. So let's say that they're too thin right now. We'll put it to 8. Now, I guarantee that it won't look good. That's something about thin wires looks really nice. So I would suggest leaving them thinner. When in doubt, go thinner. Okay, so then the last thing is you want to go back to module 1. Ta-da! we have our final result. Now the cool thing about version 2 is that I've actually adjusted the wires so that the highlights, the bright areas that's being affected from the neon is affecting the color of the wire. In version 1, it was just selected by the user. So if you had a neon that was two different colors, you had to select one color or the other. But this does it organically, so it looks like the color is actually coming from the bulb, making it look even more realistic. All right, that is everything for the wires. In the next video, we're going to go over the module construct. We are on tutorial number 6, the module construct. So what I want you to do is go to step 4 and then go to module 1 and double click on there. And now you can see that we have a bunch more layers in here, and we've been going back and forth previously to see the results of our details in Neon, but now we're going to actually dig into these different controllers. And these two controller layers are the master controllers for the Neon and for the scene. So anything relating to the actual Neon itself, you're going to be adjusting with this Neon controller, and anything relating to the scene or the walls or anything else, you're going to be adjusting with the scene controller. So let's begin on the Neon controller. And we actually adjusted the simple Neon animator very briefly before, but let's do it in more detail now. So this is going to be the master animator that you're going to use for your neon. So let's say, for example, we want after 10 frames our neon to turn on. So what we're going to do is we're going to twirl down the simple neon animator, and then we're going to hit the stopwatch icon right here, and that's going to set a keyframe. And then I'm going to hit U on this layer just so you can see that keyframe that's set up right there. And then I'm going to bring the current time indicator back 1 frame. And this we're going to set to 0, so it's completely off. So now our neon is off at 9 frames to 0 frames, and then at the 10th frame it turns on. So it's really that simple if you're just wanting to basically turn it on and off. Now one tip I will give with this is that you don't necessarily have to have it at 0. Like you can put it at 15%, so there's just a little bit of color poking through. And in certain scenarios that actually looks really nice to be able to still kind of see the color instead of pure black at 0. So moving on, we have these animators, and we're going to go over these in the last tutorial, Animating Neons. So we'll just skip over them for right now. And then we have these bulb options. Now these are the master bulb options for getting your glow to look how you want it to look. And I tried to name everything within the Neon and Scene controller, so it's kind of self-explanatory. So I'll just briefly go over them. This bulb intensity is how much white is within the logo, and that enables you to kind of brighten up something a little bit. The bulb texture, there's a little bit of grain that's happening in there. So if we turn the simple neon animator down to like 65, for example, the texture becomes a lot more visible. And then maybe we'll bump up the texture just to make it more apparent to like 75. So now we can start to see the little texture specks coming in there. And it's not completely necessary, but I feel like it adds a little bit to the realism of the neon to just barely be able to see texture on it. So that's why I have that set to 50. The next is the bulb hue. So you can adjust it if you wanted to turn the hue down or up. Then I have the glow fine tune. This is one that's new in version 2. I wanted one more slider to be able to really fine tune the results of how much actual radiance came from the bulb itself. And also this bulb brightness is a new feature in version 2 as well. This allows you to have just a little bit more random brighter spots within the logo, and it's really subtle, but if you want to adjust that, you certainly can. So we'll go down the line, and just to note too that I have these dividers, and these dividers note that it's a different section. So we have the animator section, the bulb section, and now we're in the tube section. All right, so moving on to the next section, we have these tubes. If you enable the tubes, it adds this kind of like glass tube effect around the actual neons. All these different features are kind of self-explanatory. The highlight brightness, the refraction opacity, the tube random seed. So if you're not quite liking the results of how the reflections are looking, you can change this to a different number, and it'll completely transform where the different highlights are in the scene. And side note, all the reflections are linked to the camera controller. So when you move the camera, it actually adjusts the reflections and the highlights to make it look even more realistic. So we'll continue on. I'll disable that neon tube, and we'll go to the wire. So you can adjust I know I technically said that this is just the neon, but I figured that the details in wire are part of the neon. So you can adjust where the light source is coming from with the neon wires. You can adjust the color of the wires, the texture, bevel, all kind of self-explanatory. And then we went over these different ones before, where you can disable the details, wires, caps, ties, or there's kind of a subtle vignette that's happening around the scene. So you can turn that down if you'd like, or disable it or turn down the opacity right here. And then finally, we have this enable custom glow settings. And I have a glow setting on by default, but if you aren't quite liking it, if you want to customize it even further, feel free to. Try to set this up so that it works great for advanced After Effects users and beginners. Okay, so let's go on from the Neon controller to the scene controller. Now on the very top here, we went over this one briefly also, the enable quick edit mode. And this allows you to quickly turn off all the different features in the product, all the shadows, the wires. So it's just the background, the camera, and the neon. And this allows you to really quickly animate the camera or do a bunch of things visually, if you want to see how maybe the layout looks. So you might want to enable that. And then we have this enable real shadows feature. Now by default, I have in this version, one of the things that I adjusted from version 1 to version 2 is the shadows, because they're pretty render intense. And I created these fake shadows from all the different scene elements in the project. But if you do want to enable real shadows, you can. And if you're having stuff animate within the scene, you may have to enable real shadows to get it to look realistic. So you can enable that if you like. And then I have these faux shadow options. So that's what you're seeing right now. And you can adjust the opacity of the shadows or the blur of the shadows. And then we have the wall settings. So this is really cool. If you twirl down this enable brick wall and the wood wall, by default, it's on the wood wall. So if we turn that off and turn on the brick wall, and I zoom back, we've just completely transformed our scene into a brick wall scene. Now below that we have the gradient wall, so I'll enable that and disable the brick wall. And then you can see that we can just adjust with the gradient settings below here. We can adjust that to whatever colors we want within there. So I'll re-enable the wood, turn that off, and twirl these up to keep things kind of clean. Now these next two settings are very important because what they allow you to do is adjust the illumination that the bulbs have onto the background in this scene. So let's say, for example, you're not quite liking how the neons, they're making the background too bright. You can go in and adjust it right here. You can turn this down from like 50 to 20, for example, and that will significantly adjust the look of the scene. So I'll undo that. And you can even adjust the illumination radius, so how far the neon projects onto the background. And then we have these two left wall and right wall. If you enable these two, we'll now have a left and a right wall show up. So that's really cool. And they have the illumination set on them as well. So you can adjust those. And you can disable the front wall if you'd want to. So we'll go down and you can actually adjust the position of those walls. So you can move it over if you like. So you can see that the wall, if I undo, redo, so that way we can adjust the X position of the wall and kind of customize that to how you want it. And then you can also adjust the Y position, so you can move it up or down in the scene. Below that, we have the side wall adjustments, if you want to make any of these. The brightness, how much brightness, the fall off, the Z position. Now with the Z position, you might want to adjust this if you have a really small logo and it's not quite projecting in the spot that you want on the walls themselves, or you're not seeing them. I would recommend adjusting the sidewall Z position. And then the fall off, how far the brightness goes off of these side walls, and then the illumination radius, and then the corner shading. There's some, in the very corner back here, there's some shading that's happening where the two walls meet up together. So I'll disable these two walls now, and we'll move on. Below the sidewall settings, we have the mount, the fog, the glass, the truss, and the sign, and the outline. And those are all settings we're going to go over really quickly in tutorial number 8, scene elements. But these last few settings I want to go over with you. And this main light brightness and left wall and right wall brightness, there's actual lights that are set up in the scene. So if you want to adjust those or move those, you can. And if I disable shy layers, you can see that I have them set up so that the lights are connected or parented to null layers. So if you want to adjust the position of any of the lights, you can adjust just the position of these nulls. So I'll go back to the Neon controller. And additionally, I have the shadow darkness and the shadow diffusion. Now these will only work if you have enabled real shadows enabled. So it's kind of like the shadow opacity and shadow blur for the faux ones. These are the real ones for the real digital lights that we have set up. And then finally, we have this enable shine feature. And this just kind of adds a really nice sheen to the look of the scene. If I turn that off, you can see that it kind of darkens the scene, and enabling this allows you to just kind of brighten up the highlights a little bit within the background. And just that little bit makes a really big difference in the final result. Now below the controllers, we have this color correction layer, CC layer, and that's just a simple curves on there. So if you want to adjust any of the curves that I have set up by default, feel free to go ahead. Then we have this camera layer, and the camera is green, and we're going to go over the camera in the next tutorial, the camera selection. So we'll skip over that. Now below that we have some scene elements, and I also have some ones that are shied out that I really don't think you'll have to adjust. So just don't worry about those ones. So those are all the main features, but there's a couple more things I want to go over with you in this tutorial, and that is within the module construct. If we twirl that down, we're going to go into this module 1 custom elements and twirl that down. Now we're going to skip over this module 1 custom animation, but I want to discuss these three: the custom background, the non-illuminating, and then the module 1 tube isolation. So the custom background is really that. It's the custom background that you can edit yourself and add a background in. So let's do that right now. We're in our module 1 custom background, and I'm going to import a tileable graphic. I have one on my desktop that I've saved, this concrete example. So we're going to open that up, and I'm just going to drag that into the timeline. And it's not quite big enough to fill it up. So what we're going to do, and as long as you have a tileable image, this will work. And we're going to go to the Effect and Presets panel, and we're going to type in Reptile and drag that over. And then we're going to expand to the right, and I'll copy those settings to the left, and then expand down, and copy those settings above. And now we have a custom background. Now I can tell that this is going to be too bright. You want kind of a darker background. So the way to make this darker that I think is the fastest is just to go in here, type curves, and then drag a curves over to the effects panel. Now with our curves, if you go to the very top right and drag that down, and you want it to be pretty dark, somewhere around probably right there. If we go back to our module 1, you can see that we have our custom background that we just created in there. And the cool thing is that actually adjusts in the sidewalls as well. So if I enable left wall, for example, we let that render, we can see that's the same custom background that we inserted. So you can very quickly add your own custom background. So I'm going to delete that, go back to the wood wall, and then I'm also going to disable the left wall. So going back to those custom settings, we have module 1 non-illuminating. What this is for is, let's say you have an element within the scene that you don't want to be a neon. Like for example, in the neon sign kit, in the sign kit part of it, I didn't want that to be a neon. I just wanted it to be on. And that's what you would put within this composition. And you can see what I mean if you go into the demo comp in module 2 or 3, whichever one the main neon sign kit image is in, and you can see what I mean. And most users won't even have to worry about this step, but just know if you want something in the scene that you don't want to illuminate, you can add it in here. This last option, module 1 tube isolation, let's double click into there. What you would use this for, let's say you have multiple neon elements. You have this text, and let's say you had a couple other text examples within here that you wanted to be neons, and you wanted some of them to have the tube on them and some of them to not have the tube on them. So what you would do is you would click on this layer and you would create a mask around that. So I'll do that right now. And now the only area that will have a tube, it will be the area that's highlighted. So if I go back to module 1 and I enable the tube, you'll see that there's only tube on the part that I've selected. So there's no tube on the rest of the text. So this is kind of an advanced feature. It's kind of getting nitpicky again, but if you wanted to do this, I wanted to make sure to add that feature for you. So that is everything for the module construct, you guys. In the next video, we're going to go over step 5, camera selection. We are now on tutorial number 7, camera selection. So in this video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to actually be selecting the camera that we want from our assets folder and then pasting that into the module that we're working with. So let's go to our download from Video Hive now. I have mine on my desktop, and we'll go to the assets folder and then camera examples. And here you're going to select the base for your camera move. Now, you're still going to have to tweak these a little bit, but you shouldn't have to too much. I couldn't know exactly where your neon was going to be and how large it was going to be, so I kind of made it larger than it's probably going to be. So we're still going to have to go in and customize it just a little bit, but I'll show you how to do that. So what we're going to do is close out of here, and then we're going to go to step 5, camera selection. And let's say, for example, we like camera 5. It doesn't really matter. So double click on camera 5. And now you want to do these exact steps in the exact order that I'm doing them. You're going to select the camera controller and then hold Shift and select the camera. Then you're going to hit Command C to copy those. go back to the module that you're working with and select the old camera controller layer. So when that layer is highlighted, we're going to hit Command V and paste that in. And then we're going to delete the old camera and the old controller. And finally, we're going to rename, hit Enter when the camera's selected, the camera 2 that was just pasted in, rename that to camera. It can't be named anything else other than camera because there are expressions in the project that are linked to this camera layer. And if you change the name of it, you're going to get an error. And we don't want errors. So just make sure that you do that in the exact order that I did. Now, by default, with these cameras, I have a bunch of options set up for you. And with these different pre-set up cameras, different features are animated. By default, some have camera depth of field enabled. Now, if you are in a hurry, or you're not comfortable with After Effects, I would highly recommend disabling the depth of field because, for one, it's very render intense. It will make all your renders take probably twice as long to render out. And two, it can be very finicky to work with. Like, you have to make sure that you have the depth of field in just the right spots. So by default, I have them on, but I want you, if you're not comfortable, to turn them off. Okay? So the next thing is we have this camera focus distance and the aperture. So the aperture amount is how much blur essentially is happening in the areas that aren't in focus. And then below that, I'll twirl all these up to make it a little bit easier to see. We have this frequency and all these features right here. So these features that I have highlighted are relating to the camera randomness motion. So if you change the frequency by default on this one, it's set to 0.5. Now by default, all the main cameras are set to 0 on the frequency, so they will not wiggle at all. But a lot of these default ones, they have a subtle sway, a motion to them that makes it look more realistic in the scene. So this is the frequency, or how often per second you want it to wiggle. I wouldn't recommend having this much higher than a value of 1. I think 0.5 is a nice subtle value. The next thing is all these different features are the amount of randomness that happens within the wiggle. So the direction the camera wiggles, the Z position, all these different features that will randomly wiggle to make the scene look more realistic. And what it kind of does is it makes the scene look like there's a cameraman holding a camera. And unless you have a camera on a tripod, it will not be perfectly still. So we add a little bit of organic movement to the scene this way. And then the chaos I would not recommend touching, only for advanced users. That's the chaos portion of the wiggle if you want to adjust that. So we'll twirl all those up. Now let's say, for example, with this, our neon is a little bit further back than we want. And again, I couldn't know exactly how large your neon was going to be to make sure that it was perfect. So I went back a little bit further in Z space, and I want you to be able to adjust this and feel confident in knowing how to adjust the camera setup and camera controllers that I've created. So what you're going to want to do is put the camera in, and now I would recommend enabling the quick edit mode because this is the perfect time to do it. If you want to disable the depth of field on the camera controller, I would also recommend doing that as well. So now it's going to go really fast. Like, you can just scrub your current time indicator around and everything's going to go very quickly. Okay, so then what we're going to do is we're going to kind of compositionally figure out how close we want the camera to the scene. So in this position, I say it's maybe a little bit too far back. So what we're going to do is we're going to go on the camera controller and hit U. And that will bring up any keyframed elements within the scene. Now, all these different elements are animated. So I have the camera focus distance, all the position and the rotations. But what we're really focused on in this one is the camera distance if we're using the depth of field and the Z position. So let's go to the Z position. It's this one right here. And when I click on that, these two highlight. Now I'm going to bring my current time indicator over to that second keyframe. And you want to make sure now that in After Effects, if you have multiple keyframes on the same property highlighted, this will move both of them if I adjust the slider right now. And we don't want that. We want it to just adjust this one right here. So making sure our current time indicator is on this keyframe, we're going to move the Z position forward. So maybe something more like this. Kind of how far back the main camera that begins the scene is. Okay, so now we're pretty close to there, but let's say that we do want the depth of field enabled. Well, by default, this is going to be a little bit blurry because the focus distance that I have set up is just a little bit different. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to bring your current time indicator to that camera focus distance keyframe. So maybe something like right there. And we can see that this is out of focus right now. So then what we're going to do is we're going to go to the camera controller, and then we're going to go to the focus distance, and we're going to move this so that everything is sharp within the scene. So I'm going to drag this down, And you're just gonna have to keep going and adjusting until you get the sharpest setting possible. So maybe bump it up just a little bit right now. There, I think that's really close. So now if we disable quick edit mode, we have our camera animated and we have everything looking exactly how we want. Now the focus distance is so sharp in this example, so you might want to turn that down, the camera aperture, to maybe something like 300, because even the background is starting to get a little bit blurred out and we don't want that. There. So now there's just a little bit of blur happening on the edges, and that's exactly what we want right now. Alright, so that is how you edit the camera and insert the cameras from the different examples in. So in the next tutorial, we're going to go over the scene elements. Alright you guys, we are in tutorial number 8. So what we're going to do first within module 1 is we're going to go over the mount. So if you see under scene controller, by default, I have all the scene elements off, so you have to enable them if you want them. So let's say we want the mount in the scene. So we're going to click Enable Mount, and it's going to add them, but we're still going to have to customize where we want the position of the mount and how many mounts we want. So we'll go into Module 1 Mount, Layer 20. We don't really want to get to here. We want to dig in a little bit deeper into the Module 1 Mount Builder. Now within here, you can see that we have the option to adjust these. So I'm going to hit Command-Shift-H because when I'm selecting them, I'm not seeing the arrows come up. So I'm going to move this down here, and I'm going to go to the bottom one and move this one up. It's really just that simple for it. Now you can see that there's realistic elements happening where the highlights are coming from the actual spots, just like the wires on the mount itself. Now let's say that we wanted to adjust it even further. We can go in the controller and we can adjust the width of all of them at the same time. We can adjust the height, and that makes them a little bit more thick. And we can adjust the depth. So if we did end up moving the neon in Z position, we can adjust that. And if you want more mounts, all you have to do is just hit Command-D with one of them highlighted, and you can add as many as you like and individually position them wherever you like in the scene. And that's kind of the theme for all these different scene elements. I tried to make them really simple to use. So let's go back to Module 1 and go to the next one. We'll disable the mount and we'll go to the fog. Now the fog by default, if I turn this on, it's pretty subtle. And in the demo, I had it kind of an extreme example, but I would recommend to use this as a subtle tool in your scene. So you can go in, and the really cool thing about this is it's volumetric. So if you move the camera around, it will realistically light the fog that's in the scene. And additionally, if you have certain areas that are colored and certain that are a different color, they'll all show up in the fog. So it's a really cool feature, and I added a ton of options for you to be able to play around with. So you can adjust the fog position. This is for the X and the Y position. You can adjust the Z position. You can adjust the height, the width, the depth, the illumination that the fog gets from the neon itself, the seed, so you can make it look different. You can even adjust the sharpness of the fog itself to make it look a little bit more crisp in the scene, or more fog-like and less visible, but just transparent. You can even adjust the fog sharpness and make it look a little bit more like smoke if you want. And then finally, you can adjust the main color of the fog. You can adjust the brightness and the contrast of the fog. So these are a ton of things to play around with, and I had a lot of fun making it, so I hope you enjoy using it in your scenes. So we'll turn that off, and then we'll go down to the glass. Now, if you want to enable the glass, so I'll enable both of them. So now the next step, once we enable the glasses, we have to shape it to fit around our neon. And the glass size X is actually pretty good. I think the glass size Y, though, can be a little bit shorter. So maybe something like 18. See how that looks. That's too small. We'll go to 37. That's pretty close. But I would say that the position needs to be bumped up just a little bit higher. There, something like that looks really nice. Maybe a little bit more. Doesn't matter. Not designing it for an actual project. So we'll just say that that looks good for right now. You can adjust the glass visibility. So if you turn this up to like 8, it kind of more so makes the glass dirtier, if that makes sense. You can adjust the tint. The way the tint is set up is that it's not actually being illuminated from the light. I mean, the brightness of it is, but the color isn't. So you're gonna have to select which color you want the corners to be in the glass. And then we have this glass reflection. Now by default it's set to 5, but let's say we set it to 25 so we can really see it in action. It's this line coming up right here, and it will realistically move around with the scene and with the camera to make it look like it's reflecting something in the background, to make it look even more real. So I would suggest using it really subtle, maybe like 5 or 10 max for the reflection strength on it. But it's a really nice tool to add into all the different elements within the scene. Now, one quick warning with the truss before I move on. The truss are really render intense. So if you have a very short deadline or a very not powerful computer, I probably wouldn't recommend having them on. I especially would not recommend having the truss enabled and the depth of field on at the same time because render times will go from maybe 2-3 minutes for a 5-second render to 30 minutes to 2 hours. Like, it just gets crazy. And so make sure that you are conscious that it's going to take longer to render this out if you enable the truss. Okay, so with that being said, let's go to the rooftop scene. And I have the depth of field enabled on here. I want to say that for this particular scene, it took 45 minutes to render 5 seconds. So it gives you a rough estimate of how long that took. And the reason why that is because After Effects isn't great about having multiple elements like what I'm doing in this scene. I'm not going to go much more into detail than that, but how we're going to create our truss are we're going to go into the truss scene, and then we're going to go into the truss builder comp. And now within here, I'm going to delete, very similar to how, we'll let it render for just a second so you can see what's in here. Now I'm going to delete all of these except for one. I'm going to take this one, and when I select it, the arrows don't come up. So I'm going to hit Command-Shift-H so we can see the arrows, and then I'm going to hit Command-D and duplicate it. So now we've created a second truss element. So we're going to move that up so it's kind of stacked on top of each other. So that is how you do the building blocks for the truss. Now I can select both of these, hit Command-D, and drag them over to something like that. And now maybe take all 4 of these and drag them over. So you can see that on that blue progress bar that these are a lot more difficult for After Effects to process. And there's really not much to these, but it's just a thing that After Effects struggles with, are realistic 3D elements within a scene. Okay, so we'll go back to the rooftop, and now you can see it's going to look almost identical, except for it's going to have these end 4 removed. And you can see how slow this is updating. Oh, and one more thing with the truss is the wall itself. You'll notice if we go into the background composition, we'll let that render for just a second, that on this rooftop front that I have, if I hit Command-Shift-H, I have a mask on there. So you can see this mask has just this bottom part enabled, and that allows you to put a background, which I have this sunset, and if I hit P, you can see I have this shifted way back in Z position, and on the S, I have it scaled way up. So that's one trick of how I got this scene to look the way it does. And if you want to get the same look, you can even just use mine as a base, start with the rooftop scene, and then customize it from there. All right, so moving on now, we're going to go to the sign, and I'm going to disable the glass front and glass back, so that's not on anymore. Okay, so now we're back to from scratch. So what we're going to do is we're going to enable the sign. So we'll click here, and by default, you can't see the sign. And the reason why you can't see it right now is because the background is enabled. So let's say I kind of wanted to recreate that sidewall scene that I have in the demo. What you can do is you can go to the scene controller, and you can go to the enable front wall, disable that, and the left wall, enable that. Now we'd also want to go in and add a layer within here to our background to make something behind there. And I can do that really quick. That's not a big deal. Go to our assets folder. I'll just add in again that, that traffic neon lights. Make sure you turn that 3D. And that's going to render for just a second. Now it's way too large of an image. So we'll scale it down to like, I don't know, maybe 30. Too small. A little bit larger. I'm going to hit Command-Shift-H so I can see the scene elements. So that's about the right size. And then I actually had a few different elements on there, but I think you get the idea of like having a background in there. And if you wanted to customize this shape, this circle, if you wanted it to be maybe a different shape for a sign, what you're going to want to do is go to Step 4, Module Construct, and then go into the module that you're working with, and then go into Module Assets, and then go to Sign, and then go to Sign Editor. And here you can adjust the shape. Now if I toggle the transparency on and off, you can see that I have this, this sign shape right here. So you can adjust this and make a shape layer if you'd like, or adjust the size of this, whichever you want. And you can make a custom sign that way. So I'll undo all those steps so we're back to the beginning. And then I'll go down to the last one, which is the outline. Now, if we enable the outline, what happens is it creates an outline. It creates kind of a backdrop for the neon. And Sometimes it looks good with certain neons, sometimes it doesn't look good, but I added it just in case. And then I have this double line feature, so you can have like a line and then another line. So it kind of makes it look like a little bit more cartoonish. You can adjust the colors on there. I'll disable that. And this is pretty customizable too. You can adjust the size of the outline. You can adjust the color, the opacity of the outline. There actually is a reflection that you can add onto there to make it look even more realistic. You can adjust the anti-aliasing. So there's a bunch of different settings you can play with on there. All right, you guys, that is everything for the scene elements. In the next tutorial, we're going to go over animating the neons. We are on the last tutorial, animating the neons, and this is a really simple new setup that I have for you, because in version 1, I noticed that a lot of people were having difficulty with animating multiple parts, so I tried to really streamline this and make it as easy as possible for you to animate. So let's say in this example, we have the text example that we want to come on first, and then we want this pink circle to come on a few frames after, and finally, we want the E to flicker. So we're going to do all that in this tutorial. So let's begin by going to Module Construct and twirling that down, and then go to Module 1, and then going to the Custom Elements. Now within here, we have this Module 1 Custom Animation. So that's what we're going to be working with. We'll double click into there, and you can see right away that we have these 3 colors, A, B, and C. Now, this allows you to isolate up to 3 unique areas and animate them in your scene. And how this works is we're going to enable A, the visibility, and now it turns the whole layer red. And whatever is left red will be the A in the animator. So let me show you what I mean by that. If I take and mask out on layer A, this top part, so now anything that's touching A is part of the A animator that I have set up for you. So go back to Module 1, and then we'll go to the Neon controller and Animator A. Now, if you bring the brightness down to 0, that will turn the brightness of anything that has that red over it to 0. So you can disable it or turn the brightness down that way. So let's go back to the custom animation, and I'm going to make another mask in there by selecting A and then hitting G to get the pen tool up, and then we're going to go around this again. And then finally, you want to hit MM to bring up all the mask options, and you want to add a blur, something like 30 or 20, something that's, it doesn't have to be super strong, but just something that there's not a hard edge on there. So now this bottom part is going to be removed. And you can see right here on the very bottom that there's still a little bit of illumination that's happening from where it was, which you could technically go in and mask out within the custom animation scene. But I wanted to opt for ease of use in this particular feature. So all you have to do is just go in, mask the area that you want, and then you can animate it just like the simple Neon animator to animate something in or flicker it. So let's continue on. I'm going to hit U on the Neon controller layer, and then I'm going to go to frame 15. And let's say that we want the pink circle to animate on at frame 15. So we're going to set a keyframe, hitting the keyframe icon right here, and then we're going to turn this on to 100. So it's at 100%. And then go back 1 keyframe. I'm going to hit U again on the layer so that you can see all the keyframed properties. And then I'm going to go to 0. So now our animation will go all off at frame 9, and then it's going to turn on at frame 10, and then it's going to have that turn on the circle at frame 15. So you can see this happening in real time. Okay, and then let's say at frame 20 we want the E to flicker on. So we're going to go back to our custom animation, and now we're going to go to our B, the green layer, and enable that. And then we're going to create a mask over that. So something right around there. And hit MM for the mask options and add just a little bit of a blur, like 30 on that. And then go back to our Module 1. And then we're going to go to B. And now we're going to make it flicker. So we'll set a keyframe on frame 20. We'll go forward 1 frame. I'm going to hit U so you can see the keyframe properties again. And then I'm going to go to 0. So it's going to turn that neon, the E, completely off. Okay, and then go forward 1 more again. Go to 100. And now if we play this back, you can see our full animation where it flickers. Now the flicker is really subtle, and for flickering, I recommend, this is a really good frame sequence I've found. If you go to 100%, 0, 100%, 0, and then go to 50%, and then go forward 3 frames to 0. That's a really nice way of flickering something to turn it off. That's what I used in the demo for when it said available only on Video Hive. So let it do its thing for a second. And now you can see when we play this back that now the E flickers out. And you can use this technique on up to 3 elements within your scene. So you can have different things animate in at different times, or you can have different things flicker if you want. All right, guys, so I really hope that you enjoy the product. If you have any questions at all, you can feel free to message me on my author profile page on Video Hive or directly at support@thomascover.com. All right, you guys, thank you again. Have a great day.